No Time to Die is the fifth and final Daniel Craig James Bond movie and the final James Bond movie in my James Bond movie review countdown. Be sure to check out my playlist with my previous James Bond movie reviews. As well, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Now let's get into this review. In this movie, James Bond has left active service and his peace is short-lived when Felix Leiter, an old friend from the CIA, turns up asking for some help, leading Bond into a trail of a mysterious villain armed with a dangerous new technology. So I really like No Time to Die. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I have a great time every time I'm watching this movie, and I rewatched it and I was definitely feeling there are parts of this movie that remind me of the classic Bond films, but this movie also does a lot of stuff that makes it stand out and makes it its own movie. It's not the same old movie that we've gotten before. I know some people had an issue with Spectre because it was too formulaic, too much like older Bond films that we got. This one does a lot of different things, which I really liked. But it still has stuff that reminds me of the older Bond films. For one, sort of the villain and the overall plot of this movie, it's much bigger than some of the other plots going on in the Daniel Craig era. This one's much more world-threatening, and I really enjoyed that. It's got its villain with this sort of secret layer, sort of reminded me a bit of Dr. No, or even a little bit of You Only Live Twice with their villains and their bases. Reminded me a bit of that. And like I said, it's a bigger plot than like Casino Royale and some of the other Daniel Craig Bond films. And it worked for me in this movie. A lot of the stuff they did in this worked for me. The stuff that was sort of more classic Bond work and the stuff that is new to this franchise worked for me a lot. Now, this is the most recent Bond film. It came out in 2021, so I am going to go into spoilers with this review in case you haven't seen it, so that's your warning. But No Time to Die, final Daniel Craig Bond film, and for me, I think this was the highest send-off to a Bond actor they've had so far. I really liked it. I liked the way they closed off his story. I liked how they had some connections to the other films, like you see Vesper's grave at the start of this movie, calling back to Casino Royale. And that scene led into a great opening scene with the action, the chasing in it. I thought it was great, very exciting. Enjoyed the car chase, the chase on foot at the start. I really enjoyed that. I think all the action in this movie was really good. The fist fights, the big epic chases, the final confrontation where he's walking up the stairwell, all of that was great. I enjoyed some of the one shots, like when he was going up the stairwell. That was great as well. The fight in Cuba was great, especially with Ana de Armas' character. She was great. I enjoyed her appearance. You get Jeffrey Wright back as Felix Leiter. He had a really fun appearance. I was glad to see him back. He was only in the first two Daniel Craig Bond films, so I was glad he came back for this one. And Daniel Craig himself was great in this movie as well. I'm glad they gave him this send-off. And as I said, they did some things differently in this movie, which some people didn't like, but for me, worked very well. One of those is James Bond has a daughter in this movie. And I really like that they added that aspect to this movie because, as I said, the plot for this is much bigger than some of the other Daniel Craig Bond films. So the threats are higher, but this added a more personal level to the character. In that final act, there's tension for what's going to happen to the entire planet, basically, with this dangerous technology, but there's also personal stakes for Bond, which added more tension. That was sort of something I liked in Skyfall when Bond was trying to protect M. Sort of similar to that. So him having a daughter and his relationship with Madeleine Swann, I thought worked very well because it just added more tension for me in that final act, and it sort of grounded it a bit because it wasn't just, oh, the world's going to end sort of situation. So I really liked that, and it was something different that they've never done in a Bond film before. It's a 25th movie, so I understand they're going to do some things differently, and that worked for me. There's a really cute moment too early on when you find out that he has a daughter, where he's sort of like cutting an apple for her because she's hungry for wanting breakfast. It's sort of a nice moment. He's trying to be a parent, but he's still not quite sure what to do. I thought it was a really fun scene, and I really liked that. And I enjoyed all the returning characters in this movie. M, played by Ralph Fiennes, I really liked. Q, played by Ben Whishaw, always enjoyed his Q, so I was glad he was back. You got Naomi Harris as Moneypenny, she was great again. You got Madeleine Swann back, played by Léa Seydoux, I believe that's how you pronounce her name. She was really good, and I bought into her relationship with Bond more in this movie than I did in Spectre. I just thought it worked better. I enjoyed what they did with it. I know people had an issue with what happened at the start, where the situations lead Bond to believe she betrayed him. Some people didn't like that, but to me it would make sense, because Bond's not a guy who trusts people. From what we saw in Casino Royale, pretty much the first person he really loved kind of betrayed him in a way. So he's not going to trust people. Plus, there was a lot of stuff that was really convenient, like Spectre being at this location and having a bomb on Vesper's grave. So stuff like that didn't bother me. It worked for me in this movie. And there's some new characters that I like too, like Nomi, who's the new 007 at the start of this movie. I know a lot of people had an issue when they announced that that was going to be 007, but to me I was like, okay, well, he retired at the end of Spectre, so obviously he wasn't going to be 007 at the start of this movie. And she was not in any way replacing him as James Bond. I don't think she's going to be back for any other movies. I think this was just it for that character. And I enjoyed her character, and I enjoyed in the final act that she was on the mission with Bond, because we don't see too many 00s working with each other in these movies. I think the only other time was the start of GoldenEye with Pierce Brosnan's first Bond film, when Sean Bean was playing 006, I believe it was. I think that was really the only time. I guess the final battle in Thunderball had a bunch of 00s, but you didn't really see their faces or anything. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed Rami Malek as the villain. I thought he gave a very good performance. He had some scenes that were kind of creepy that I liked. His sort of first scene with Madeline as an adult I thought was great, and his sort of first face-to-face interaction with Bond, I really enjoyed that scene as well. My issue with his character though was sort of the lack of development. Like, he has an issue with Spectre and Madeline Swan's father, and he has a connection with her. All that I understood. They did that fine. But his motivation to do this big scheme of having this technology that could impact the entire world, I didn't think they developed his character enough to really buy into why he's doing that, and I wish they could have taken more time to develop that, because it's, to me, he was close. He could have been a great villain, but he wasn't quite there. And I think that's probably my biggest issue with this movie, is that his villain just wasn't quite developed enough. But when he was on screen, I enjoyed him because of the performance by Rami Malek. So that was good. And there's a bunch of great scenes in this. All the action scenes I really like. There's a great scene with Bond and M when they have their first face-to-face meeting in this movie. It's very tense. Bond's not really holding back on M. He's giving him crap. I really enjoyed that. And now I'm going to talk about the most controversial part of this movie. And for you, those of you who don't know, about to spoil it, James Bond dies. A lot of people didn't like that decision. That's fine if you didn't like it. A lot of people didn't. I get that. But I had to guess that's how they were going to end this movie. Just because leading up to it, I don't know, No Time to Die, I don't know. For me, the title suggested they may do that. I know they've used die in other James Bond titles, but to me it just sort of sounded like that. Plus, Lee Seydoux said when she had first watched the movie, long before it was released, the ending made her cry. So I was like, okay, maybe they're going to kill Bond. So I was prepared for them to do that. They did it, and honestly, for me, the scene really worked. I was very emotional. I sort of like what was going on. It worked for me. It got me in the emotions. And like, I understand the next era of Bond's going to be a completely new era. Like, if you've seen my other reviews, you probably know that I review each iteration of Bond as sort of its own canon, if that makes sense. But Daniel Craig was definitely his own, because he started off becoming 007 in his first movie. And by his third one, they had established he was getting older, so I did not expect the next Bond to be the same Bond as Daniel Craig's. So for me, it was fine. That's just how they decided to end his run. If you didn't want Bond to die, that's fine. You didn't like it, you didn't like it. But for me, it worked. It got me in the emotions. And for me, like, I thought it paid off. I liked that Bond died saving both the world by having the torpedoes or the missiles bomb the island, but also saving his partner and child. So for me, I really like that. And honestly, with No Time to Die, it's one of my favorite Bond films. Not quite my favorite, but I think other than my issue with the lack of development with the villain, I don't have too many issues with this movie. I love a lot of it. There's some moments where like, okay, CGI is not perfect, But all the action was great. There's a great action scene in the forest where it's really foggy. I love that action scene. It might be my favorite. It's probably between that one and when he's going up the stairwell at the end in the final battle. Those are probably my two favorite action scenes in this movie. There's a great scene with Blofeld in this as well. I thought his character was used quite well in this. They didn't ignore the twist that they did in Spectre that a lot of people didn't like, but I thought they handled it the best they could. And his scene I thought was great. I loved his dynamic with Bond, and the chemistry Daniel Craig and Christoph Waltz had in that scene I thought was fantastic. So for me, I really like No Time to Die. As I said, I think my one main issue is the lack of development in the villain's motivation for this giant plan he had. Other parts of what he was doing, like the more personal stuff with Spectre, I could understand that. Just the bigger stuff, like, okay, not quite clear why he would go that far, to me anyway. The action was great. I like that the stakes were higher in this movie, and there were more personal stakes for Bond in this movie as well. I really enjoyed it. So for me, I'm going to give No Time to Die a 90%. So guys, thanks for watching this, and if you stayed with me through my entire James Bond movie reviews, thank you. Let me know what you thought about this movie. Are you like me who really liked it? Were you somebody who's kind of let down by it? Let me know your thoughts. As well, be sure to stay tuned for some more reviews coming soon. And until my next video, take care everybody.